All right, well, I'm gonna get started because I only have a half hour. And the beginning is hopefully just stuff you all know already, but it's some good context for talking about struggles because maybe we'll learn some vocabulary. I'm Dan. I'm a TL on the PWA team. We've been like specifically mostly desktop installable stuff. We've had a lot of edge cases. We've had seen a lot of problems, especially from internal folks or like force installs. So I'm trying. This presentation is an attempt to like describe, what's normal, how does stuff like what's like required, like what's sort of the bare minimum you need for an installed app. Sort of what are our goals there? How we achieve that today? How we use something like the manifest and some other stuff to get that to work, and all the weird stuff and weird, like annoying, irreversible problems, etc., that people run into. And yeah, so hopefully to inform future stuff that we try to make or do, we'll be like, oh yeah, like this thing sometimes redirects, and we need to know that and handle that correctly. Things like that. Okay, so here's the structure. I kind of just said this. I also kind of at the end I go a little bit into what we could have done. What I wish would have been done in the past. And there's some feedback from at TPAC. I wrote down a bunch of stuff that people wrote as well. So in general, what are our goals? And maybe these are slightly wrong, but I think it's good to say, like, why do we want installed web apps? I think there's kind of a couple different platforms here. They've existed in the world for more than a decade now. Developers can make platform native-like experiences. How nice is that? Easier competition for app ecosystem equals better apps for users. Users can easily, and another point here is users can customize how they want to use this stuff. Like we don't force them to use an app here; they can use it in an app. In a recent week, there were more than 90,000 unique installable web apps seen by more than 50 users. So this uses UKM. So there's some it's not everything in the world all historically, but like actually seen by more than 50 users in a 7-day span. There were 90,000 unique IDs, which is pretty cool. A lot of stuff. So kind of distilling that, what are our goals? Developers should be able to meet user expectations for web apps to integrate with the operating system. So develop rich experiences. Users should be able to choose the user experience they want. UXR shown a strong segment of users want this, even if the developer hasn't opted into it. I love installing Google Calendar. I use it every day all the time. It's very sticky, and they're not promotable, right? They say this display browser. User agents can further enhance this experience. So password manager, safe browsing, autofill, all that stuff we can enhance. So let's go to some background and context. This is kind of more for the TPAC audience, but here's some articles. Here's some capabilities. Alex is here, your original post I put on here about PWAs. A little bit into capabilities, like, hey, shortcuts, that's a thing. It's on all the platforms, even Safari implements it on there.
What's a shortcut?
Shortcuts.
What's a shortcut?
What's a shortcut? Exactly. So if you see the photos here, but I can describe it. On Mac, if you use Mac, right-click on the dock icon and you get a bunch of stuff. Windows, they're called jump lists. If you right-click on the icon in Windows, you get some, they're called shortcuts or jump lists. There's the new post, Explorer notifications. And this is something that apps native apps can do, and this is something that you can do in web apps. Is that great? Title bar customization, you'll notice, hey, this doesn't look like a Chrome window anymore. There's stuff in that title bar. I think Amanda from Microsoft shipped this last year. Very, very awesome, very cool. Looks great. Wonderful. Look at that capability. Here's some example of installed sites. So this is from our UKM stuff. You can see a lot of stuff. You got media stuff, you got productivity, you got image stuff, you got social stuff, you got lots of things. Dev stuff. Final background bits. When I say like within scope of an app, so like an app, and we'll learn later how this happens, but an app will define what is it, what URLs are in it. And so I might say within scope to mean that. I might say the app controls a URL. That's what I mean when I say that. It's currently defined as a prefix that includes an origin. There's requests to change this. This is a big limitation. That's how it is today. General security model of the web is origin-based and document-based. So another good thing to keep in mind. Okay, so what does the world generally look like? What is the common architecture? So looking at a bunch of different examples, this is generally the common stuff that pops out. We have like landing pages, login pages, product home pages, and document pages. Sometimes they're all the same thing. Sometimes there's different sharings. So a landing page usually is a hub. It's not always installable. Sometimes it redirects to the login page. Sometimes it turns into the product page, but often it has like demos, about, sales, things like that. Here's some examples, like the photo editor ones. Google Meet has its own little landing page that I almost never see. And I was like, oh yeah, that exists. Login page, this is a big thing that we deal with. It's often redirects. It's often different origin. It often goes to some OAuth provider. Sometimes it's the same page. Sometimes it's the same thing as the product or landing page because it has like an old school like little login thing within the page. Sometimes it starts as a same origin site that then redirects. So a lot of complexity here if that can happen. So there's some examples. Product homepage. Sometimes it redirects to the login page. But here's some examples of product homepages. Great. Meets homepage. The document pages. Sometimes sites have different little documents that they do. Docs is an obvious one here. Sometimes, as again, this redirects. So here's some examples. Tabbed mode is on Chrome OS. This is an example of Figma. If you go to Figma on Chrome OS, you get this awesome tabbed mode experience if you install Figma. And so you get different tabs. So Riley had a Chrome OS device. He was able to take some screenshots. So super cool. This isn't shipped on other platforms, but this is an example of, some developers don't want to be installable unless they can have tabs. Okay. Anything else? Sometimes there's like brand URLs. These always redirect, like gmail.com. I didn't have anything else here. Okay. Installed needs. What do you need as an installed experience? What are the macro goals? And also know sometimes things are harder for us here. If we're trying to match the functionality of an app store, we don't have an app store. We don't have some sort of authority we can go look at for hey, what's the most recent version? So sometimes things we have to solve in different ways. In general, installing an app while visiting a site should install the full app, right? You shouldn't just install a page in that site. Launching the app should launch at the homepage of that app. It might need to redirect to a login page. Navigating to a document page should be part of the app. So navigating somewhere that is part of this app, the developer says yes, part of the app should show up as the app, and developers should be able to craft this experience. Make it look really good. Use all the features that they need to use to compete. Also, installing an app should always, if the developer wants, allow offline first launch. So let's say you installed an app, but you didn't through something, maybe it's through a new API like cross-origin install, or same origin install or anything like that, or through force install. You're doing that when you're online, but if you turn on airplane mode, go to an airplane, if the developer should have been able to do stuff so offline works. Update is a big one. I think a lot of this is sort of self-explanatory, like the shortcuts that we talked about earlier. They should be able to add them. They should be able to change the structure of their app. Stuff like icon and name that'll be a lot more careful with because those are security sensitive members. But yeah, I want to change my launch experience. When you launch YouTube, I want it to go to subscriptions all the time now because I've made that product decision, right? So update is a pretty core thing. How does this work today? Here's some examples of things being installed. In the bottom right, that's Safari's install. It's called Add to Dock. So this is the install experience that we get today, and how do we get this to work? Introducing the web app manifest. If people don't know about that, what it is the link in the HTML, and it goes to a manifest page. What does it do? What are the core things that it does? I think the most important thing is it defines an entity. We have a unique identifier for a thing. We actually didn't have this for a while, and it was causing a lot of problems, and it was inconsistent between platforms. But Androids have package IDs, Mac has the CF bundle identifier. It's really important to have a unique identity for an app for something like update or to reference it in other APIs. Best case, developer specifies the ID. We have the whole thing, but we have some backwards compatibility things we have to handle here, and ID defaults to the start URL. We can get into maybe if we have time why this is can be problematic later. Here's a table of what you get when you specify ID and start URL. Sadly, it's not simple. Again, if we required ID from the very beginning, a lot of this could be simplified. But yeah, it's not simple, sadly. Scope defines the scope of the experience. Right now, it's just a prefix. But yeah, these documents are part of this app. Properties, like declarative properties. Yeah, like file handlers, anything that's like suitable for a declarative property goes in the manifest. Security, this is a thing that it can be confusing. Manifest files, because we have this origin-centric model and the way that people use manifests through CDNs and like they have different versions of them that are different files. Our true sort of source of security is that link tag in the document. So when you want to like yes, you reference a manifest, but like we really need that link tag in a document because we trust the document's contents because of the web security model, and that link itself is the authority that says, okay, this origin/document is saying that this manifest applies and that entity is the thing. Some preview of some weirdness. Not all pages within a manifest scope have a link to the manifest. We dealt with this with Google Meet. It doesn't have a manifest on the meeting page, but it does on the landing page. This is the thing that if you're a web developer, probably you would expect, but all relative URLs in the manifest are parsed relative to the manifest URL itself, like where it's hosted. Sometimes confuses people. I think Reddit had this wrong for a really long time. ID defaults to start URL. You don't have to set it. Causes problems. We'll get into that later. And then I talked about the security model again here. Because the document's content is the authority and the origin is the authority, so the manifest has to be linked from the document. The start URL must be the same origin as the document URL because like you can't just like dansgreatapps.com gets you to install YouTube from myself and I get to control all the shortcuts and things. We don't want that. Like developers should be able to control their apps. So the identity of your app has to match, the origin of that has to match the document that you're on right now. I go a little bit in the wild. I am also going kind of fast. Does anybody have any questions so far? Are we doing okay?
Let's get through it and then do.
Yeah, let's get through and go back. In the wild, as I said, manifests are hosted by CDNs. They're often cross-origin. Often they have hashed names because that's how you host static content often because of how network caching works. When you change it, it's just a new file and you refer to it in the HTML. What properties do people set? Here's just some stats of properties that people set on the manifest. Yeah. Okay. And then one interesting thing, people set display browser so that they can have it but not be promotable. And I think, yeah. And then also you have a default manifest whether you like it or not. So if you don't specify a manifest, the spec does define what your default manifest should be. And that default manifest has the start URL being your document URL, the scope being that without a file name, query, or fragments, and the ID is the document URL without fragments. Okay, we've gotten to where it all goes wrong. So struggles that got you number one, the default that we talked about before. So you update your start URL. You better set your ID field to the old one, because if you don't, you now have two apps. You have your new app and your old app. Your new app is starturl2.html. Your old app is starturl1.html, whatever it was. Let's say what's new in subscriptions if you're a YouTube or whatever. And like if you want to update them, you have to now serve two different manifests, one with each ID, right? Because we're looking at the manifest to know if we need to update you. We say, oh, I found a manifest for the ID, start URL1. And do I have any apps installed with that? If so, great, update it. But if you now have a bunch of people that have start URL2 installed, you don't know what to serve. Basically, it just breaks a bunch of stuff. And yeah, so you now have two apps to maintain. A little bit of foreshadowing here. Redirection is a common problem. Login pages redirect. A lot of things redirect to login. async manifest links. We saw this with Microsoft 365 where the manifest is added after onload is complete. So if you need to if you're like, oh, I'll load this document and grab the manifest from it, that's not always going to be reliable because you wait until load's complete. And then if there's no manifest on it, then you just say, oh, it's the default manifest. Great. Another common gotcha is cross-origin apps. So as I said earlier,
Is Microsoft 365 still broken in that way?
I think so.
Okay, thank you.
But it's a really weird. It's with admin force installs. This is a problem because they don't specify. It's all the historical reasons. It just says install this URL. It doesn't also give an ID, and so we say we'll do our best to install this URL, and we load it. And if there's no manifest, then we say great, we'll use the default one.
Yeah, I think that there's some context for some of these gotchas, which is, as Dan was saying, is there's this idea of admins being able to say, on all the machines that I manage, this app should be installed. But to actually install the app, we have to load the page, find the manifest, find the icons, find the app name. And a lot of these gotchas are ways in which that doesn't work because it's the first time you ever launch the app and it goes and redirects to the login page, and then the browser's like, well, I went to this URL and this is what was there, so I'm going to install that. And now congratulations, you've got 5 copies of O365 install login page installed instead of like Word, Excel, PowerPoint. It's a mess.
Yeah, very fun. And an annoying amount of code complexity and database complexity has gone into tracking these things so that we can refresh them later. Cross-origin, we talked about this a little bit, but yeah, apps exist cross-origin. That's just a reality. We have some cases like different countries, but we also have things like Zoom where they have different subdomains per company. And so, our current scope definition of just a URL prefix doesn't work here. And I know Lou from Microsoft and folks are actively thinking about this and working on it. And this is under development in a nice way. The origin must match is a kind of struggle gotcha. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but yeah, like if I have dan.com or malicious dan.com, I put a manifest in there and I name it YouTube and I put a little YouTube icon there, and I can't like point to youtube.com as the start URL, and kind of like, or like bank.com if you want to, which I put here. So that's the thing that people get confused about a little bit. Network errors for manifest. No one handles this, but network errors happen, and if you want install to work, or if you're relying on the manifest being there, it might not always be there. And so people don't write on error handlers on the link tag that you make for linking to the manifest. And I think one of the big things that makes all of these things way worse, especially with the identity problem, where you changed your start URL and now you have 2 apps, you can't recover from that. You can't know the ID of what's installed right now. So you can't know what am I. You could know that you're launched in a standalone window, but you can't know what your ID is. And you can't uninstall and swap. You can't say, oh, I'm number 1 and the developer updated things to number 2, so I'm going to change my app whole identity. And you can't even uninstall. That's all controlled by the user agent and by the user. So when you make a mistake with identity and you end up with multiple apps in the wild, it's not recoverable. We talked about this a little bit. Prefix scope is not enough. Scope extensions, Lou's actively working on this and going really well. But yeah, websites are hey, I don't want a prefix. I want exclusions and exclusions, or I want stuff, I want a pattern, and so we're still kind of gathering data about the right thing. But this is definitely a heavy bike shed area of exactly what should happen. I think the general conclusion is that this needs to work on all the operating systems as well. So if I need to capture URLs from the operating system, got to make sure that all the operating systems can support whatever scheme we come up with here. Installing requires a document. I covered a little bit earlier, but this is how we register service workers in cache storage, right? There was this idea of installing from just the manifest. Great, give them the manifest and install. But if you do that, you can't install online, run offline. right? The developer didn't have a way of saying, here's my service worker, cache all the stuff. So right now, because of that, and the trust model, installing always requires a document. Display mode fallback, it's kind of a thing that I wish was designed differently. There's a static fallback list. If you specify, I might have actually swapped standalone and minimal UI. I forget which one was first, but if you specified one of those for your display, it was like, well, if the browser doesn't support full screen, then you get standalone now. And if it doesn't support standalone, then you get minimal UI all the way to browser, which is just browser tab. Obviously, with something like Windows Control Overlay or tabbed, if you need tabs, where does this go in the list? Where does Window Controls Overlay go in the list? And so we needed a way of saying the developer specifies their own fallback list, and that applies first, and then goes to display. It's named weird. We called it override because it overrides display, but common confusion point for developers. Some hiccups, which I kind of already got into. Relative URLs, Reddit's icons are broken. The scope member is often invalid, but they just don't know it. I don't know why. Manifest is not linked in every page that's in scope. SVG icons aren't supported. And also weird problems with intrinsic size of SVG icons. Manifests are often invalid, which means they don't parse. Somehow this isn't obvious. We'll just see pages with them broken. If you look in DevTools, you see errors, but developers don't have any testing to know that the manifest didn't break because of any changes. And then the ID thing, which we talked about, if they don't set the ID, it defaults to start URL, and you get 2 apps if you don't know about that. And this is all of this leads into another area here where there's no automated testing support. You can't have an automated test that says, hey, make sure this thing is installable, or I click on the install icon in Chrome, it installs and it looks right. There's nothing to do that. This is a big advantage of Electron, because Electron, you can make very thorough automated tests. And so you can't test that the install work correctly, you can't test update, you can't test that the display modes look correctly if they're anything other than standalone, because standalone is just, or I guess minimal UI, because that's just the same as the tab. Can't test scope extensions, can't test link capturing, etc. We did implement some CDP commands, so we're trying to do some work on this. But it's still a hard problem because, do you want the full thing to happen? In your automated testing environment, do you want these apps to be fully installed in whatever bot that you're working on? Some people say yes, some people say no. Developers often want to know if they are allowed to show or hide an install button. So I want to promote install because I know users interact with my app more if they install, but I don't know if it's installed. This is going to be solved by get installed related apps, and there's some other simplifications we can do with the queries. This was some audience participation from TPAC, Electron app, testing. There's a branding feedback, hey, Electron is a great name, but I don't have a name for making an app in this platform, which is very funny because I don't know. We know the word PWA, and I don't know why people didn't associate, but that was feedback. Really interested in a download page for install. Can they just download something and share? Some of this is solved. Some of the feedback is solved through things like get installed related apps. Scoping issues was common. Supporting developer community was a big request, and then also cross user agent support, where they're like, well, we don't want to force our customers to use Chrome. If we make an Electron app, we can just send that. If we have it be PWA, then we have to force everybody to use Chrome, and we don't want that, which is understandable. Okay, I'll do some minor things. We don't have a ton of time, so deep linking, people use protocol handling. There's some interesting things with promoting stuff. Install URLs. This is the admin thing. To get around all the redirection, partners are creating install specific URLs. It has a manifest, it has a service worker registration, and that's it. There's no user content, which is great. And if you're doing a bunch of force installed on a low end device, this is what you need to not make it really slow. But that was an interesting workaround. Takeaways, it's kind of just a conclusion of what I just said. There's the taxonomy, the gotchas. we need to keep all these gotchas in mind when we make new features. The idea of manual versus crafted app. Manual app was a word that Thomas Steiner just wrote when we did universal install that around users manually installing the app because they're choosing their experience. And then because we're short on time, I'll just say I would love to have had the ID be required in the manifest. That would have been amazing, but that is not what happened. A lot of things would be a lot simpler if there was a one-to-one between apps and origins. That just isn't how the web is built, and so that makes sense that we couldn't do that, but that would have been nice. It would have been great if the ID of the manifest somehow was seen as secure, but also could refer to the metadata of that app. Like I could go to the ID, like if it was the manifest URL, that was the ID, then that would be cool because you could load that and get more data about the app. But today, that's not the case. Okay, and that's it. I'm happy to dive into anywhere else, but we have a little bit of time for questions. Thanks, everybody.
Time for you to breathe.
I have a question. It's a bit generic, like PWA for mobile, has it now kind of lost the priority, or some of the installed apps on Android, they look like desktop apps, and I don't know about the performance. So is the gaps not paid attention to, or desktop is a priority now?
I think I am biased towards desktop because that's usually the area I work in the most. It's my primary area. I think maybe Vince would be a better person to.
Yeah, I'd say, so on mobile, things definitely got to a position, and we have had active work in Chromium, through this year. So there were some interesting things launched even this year for Chrome on Android for making a site installable. I believe that was there. Restoring apps that you previously installed and being able to bring them back. There was changing for the treatment of when you go to install, there's now actually a chooser for disambiguating between do I want to install or do I want just the shortcut link? So we merged those two together. And there's also a promotion using some machine learning to predict whether or not a site that wouldn't have been promotable, should we be promoting that? And that has proven to be effective as well. So we covered some of that in a Chrome developer post. And if you care a lot, go search for like how Chrome helps users find the apps they want, and that covers some of the recent news. Yeah. So here Dan has just brought this up.
Okay.
And so we cover a variety of the work that was done here, and much of this was done simultaneously on desktop and mobile. There's where we're going on mobile is going to be a little bit different than desktop. Most of our focus is on desktop, where we think that there's more of a gap of opportunity because there's much more productivity need on desktop that we're not meeting yet. Like we have most of the client application requests that we're getting are very desktop focused. So that's where our active development work is.
Okay. Yep. Sounds good.
It's maybe also worth noting that Chrome OS has announced that they're replacing the underpinnings of Chrome OS with Android, right? And of course, desktop class web apps are very important to Chrome OS. So like we have to distinguish a little bit between mobile and Android, right? Because Chrome OS is going to be a non-mobile Android.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting large screen. I think that we're going to see some changes in behavior on a phone form factor as well as behavior is fleshed out to make the large screen form factors work. And we have to keep in mind that like not all devices stay in their lane, right? So some devices switch between acting like a phone and acting like a desktop. These in-betweens, these like tablet-y type things, and you might end up docking those or attaching peripherals and using them in a very productivity way. So I expect to see continued change on the Android implementation.
There's a question on the thing on the chat about anything we, the Chromium community, are working on to solve the problems mentioned earlier. And I would say yes and no, where yes on the things that like scope extensions, things that we can add on to solve or like making things more testable. We're definitely working on stuff like that. But some of these things are just like they're gotchas because of like backwards compatibility. Like the ID, like 4% of manifests have an ID, and so we can't just require it. And just like a lot of cascading complexity just from these backwards compatibility things.
Particular, Dan, I wanted to ask about testing. Like, I'm kind of not surprised to hear all these problems if it's not even possible for developers to test their app.
Yes.
So is it just hard to get like the right like WebDriver extensions and stuff in place? Like, I think we have a pretty well established pattern now for Fugu APIs and stuff.
We have CDP commands now to test a bunch of it. We looked for a partner for it, and no one's using it. And so it's in it's an experimental for CDP commands, but very rightly so. They said, hey, can you get someone to use these?
Right.
And so I believe we have one internal partner who in Q4 has said that they'll use them and try to make some automated tests.
Right. But even for like, what about for our own regress? Like a lot of this stuff shipped before we had the policy in place in Blink that says we don't ship any new API unless it comes with a platform test.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's like, sounds like we have some debt there a little bit.
Yes. I would love, yeah. And I think also having web platform tests means that we can get other browsers to, making sure that we are actually interoperable. So yeah, I think that's definitely a goal. And I would love to take a bunch of our generated tests and instead generate WPT tests. So yeah.
Yeah, I think in general, I wouldn't say that's something that we need to block on web developers for. A lot of the times we get the web developer testing benefit as a side effect of our own principle that we need web platform tests to test our APIs.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we're definitely thinking about that for next year planning. And yeah, I'll have to check with DevTools policy around shipping stuff from experimental for like, if we just like write WebDriver hookups to it, is that enough for us to, I mean, could we keep it in experimental? I don't know. Anyways, I have to just
We'll figure it out. Let me know if I can help.
Okay. Thank you.
Sometimes there's a little bit of a mismatch between, I agree in general that like we build something for our own testing and it helps developers. Sometimes there's a little bit of disconnect between what actually is helpful for us and what's helpful for developers. Like for like device APIs, like for developers, it's like, oh, I want to be able to automate connecting like to the device that I have plugged into all the machines in my testing lab. Whereas for us, it's like, we want to automate pretending there's a device there and testing against that. And so it actually ends up being kind of a different API. So some of the questions around like, how real do you make the install when you're doing testing a web app install? We might be like, yeah, we don't want to actually install it because we're going to be installing like 50 different test apps in the process of doing web platform testing. We don't want to like explode the bot.
Right.
But like a web developer might be like, well, I'm only installing one app because I only have one app, and I'm like, I get like that's actually totally fine. So it ends up being like a different API.
Were there any things that I went too fast over that like, I don't know how much folks understood. Like I have a pre-understanding of how the manifest stuff works or installed web apps or I guess silence is good.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You went through one slide that talked about some of the sites that are using this stuff. I'm familiar because I've been looking more closely, but big picture, how are installed PWAs like trending? Like,
yeah, I actually wanted to, it was too late for me to clear more stats, but they're trending up. We have, I don't know exactly what I could say, but they're definitely trending up. I mean, obviously we have, you could see some bumps for things like school, like edu stuff is huge. And, but yeah, they've been.
My favorite one is chess.com.
chess.com.
Chess.com, yeah, they have I can install it. For that alone, I think the effort's worth it. Personally speaking, obviously.
Yeah, they're growing up. So the usage is growing. I think we have more percentage usage on Windows than Mac. And obviously the percentage used in Chrome OS is massive because that's their.
Do you still have a little bit of time or?
I have time,
Yeah, so technically speaking, we're in the break period. I think the next session starts at 3:05, which is about 30 minutes from now. But
I'm happy to
if you
hang
have
out.
questions, we should keep going.
If you don't mind, I was wondering if you could share your experience with the install prompt. I saw in your screen some of the machine learning stuff that you did, but I'm curious, do you struggle? Is this install prompt still based on like heuristics, like site engagement? Is it deterministic? Is it not deterministic? You struggle for it not being deterministic with web developers.
Yes.
And I guess where do you think things are now and where they should be going forward?
I'll start with Android because it's easier. Android now uses ML to do the prompt. So we don't, on desktop, we don't blocking prompt ever, but on Android, because of all this real estate, it does a blocking prompt to install. You can always get there through that menu, and I'm really sad that now it always says add to home screen, and I wish it had the install keyword in there. So, but anyways, you're asking about, you're not asking about universal install. You're not asking about install any site. You're asking about it showing up in the Omnibox.
Yes, that's what
Yeah. So that is heuristics. That is heuristics around
Rule-based heuristics.
rules. Yeah. You have a manifest that has icons. There is some engagement, but I think we're thinking about removing that engagement blocker. And yeah.
We're also-
One thing maybe we should share on this point is with the Android one, I was really impressed to see that like some people consider the install prompts to be a little spammy, right? And so with the AI thing, we actually reduced the frequency of install prompts quite a lot. They show a lot less.
Yeah.
But installs are actually like roughly flat, actually slightly up.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's clearly a win-win. It's
Yeah,
like
that's
clearly
really good
user
metrics.
positive, and that's like a good sign for us that,
Yeah.
you know, in these cases where we feel like there might be some developer tension of what they're trying to achieve, like push notifications and maybe FedCM, right?
Yeah.
And users, like if we work at it and maybe with the right AI models with the right data behind them,
Yeah.
we can find things that are a win for both constituents.
Yeah, and we are thinking about using the AI model on desktop. We use it on desktop, but it was a little bit too blocking, and there's a little bit too much broken bits. Like I talked before about Meet. Like people would get like, "Hey, install Meet your meeting," instead of Meet the app, because there's no manifest there.
And it would happen, during, when you go to join a meeting, it is not the time to be thinking about, do I want to install an app?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we unshipped it there, but I could see us using that for the promoting the little icon. There might be plans for moving that icon or like putting it in the controls menu. So there might be some IPHE stuff. But when you asked a question about in product help, in product help, one thing we get a lot from developers, and we got from like Adobe and stuff, is like they're trying to use some of our other APIs, like the before install prompt, and just feeling like it wasn't consistent enough for them. They just thought it was flaky. They just didn't know how to get it to work.
So navigator.install.
So navigator.install, yeah. So this presentation, part of the reason for it was to help navigator.install around things like preventing the ID problem, where you have a problem and your ID is wrong. But navigator.install is a imperative way to trigger install. So you can have a button on your site that says install, click on that, and then it triggers the prompt.
And that it's just behind a user gesture requirement.
Yes.
There's some debate as to whether or not that should be available for first party install. You know, the alternative is to just send the before install prompt event all the time.
Yes.
We're designing Navigator install for third party use primarily.
And we're I think there's a doc we're sending around. It's one of the like working on too many things. So there's we propose removing the engagement thing to make it reliable. And so I think that's going to be behind a flag in the next week or so.
There are many parallels with FedCM on this. It seems like
Can you tell us? Because I don't know.
I think we are doing the reverse. We started with the Omnibox build or the on-page load declarative thing, and now we're introducing the button that you could click. It goes into a modal dialog. That is the deterministic part. But yeah, we struggle. The developers of FedCM struggle because the FedCM prompt is it depends on heuristics also.
And remind us, so FedCM, I'm the acronym, please. So it stands for Federated Cookie Monster.
Federation Condition Management API. And it has the same it's what you see sometimes when you go to websites and you see a login prompt. And it's right now more annoying. It's probably more annoying than it should be. It's louder than the Omnibox build that you have. So we're trying to make it quieter, or maybe have machine learning to make it less annoying, so that it kind of like if we could predict that the user wants that prompt and show that when the user wants, but not show it when the user doesn't, then it would just be wonderful. So that's partially why some of the we're interested in some of the machine learning mechanisms that you did for the install prompt.
Happy to chat about it. We had a lot of learning, so we can help you spend way less time than we spent.
It would be wonderful not to run at the same walls. Yeah. No, thank you.
I would love to see an AI model that can figure out, users usually log in on this site, and they usually don't log in on this
Yeah.
site, and
It does seem like a comparable action, right? Like installation and logging in seems like perhaps one is lighter than the other, but they have similar properties perhaps.
So to tiny bit on that, the direction that we're probably going to go on desktop is moving more to the in-product help that Dan mentioned, and try to have the user interface surfacing not be promoted all that often, but when we do promote it, we're also educating you where to go in the future by yourself. What the screenshots are showing here, these appear, but they're not always there. Like if you want to if you're just on a random, Wordle or chess.com or whatever, if it doesn't meet these heuristics to get promoted, we haven't taught people how to go do an install. And so that to me, we haven't decided 100%, but to me that resonates, and I would like to move the UI treatment to much more of a like nudging and hinting of how to use the existing UI that's always available.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if it was in something like wherever the UI exists.
So like maybe as a comparable, perhaps like as a user, we have trained users. If you want to bookmark this page, there's like an anchor that you always see there, or if you want to clear cookies, you always click on the left thing. It's like if you want to install, maybe there's like a predictable place that you can go to install this app.
Very buried today. It is in the 3-dot menu. It's like under another menu. It's very
Yeah.
But yeah, I think one idea is to put it into this controls menu, which I don't think you can see.
Yeah, which is a similar concept, I think, for logging in and logging out. Like I think if you have like a predictable place that you can go to log into the website, log out to the website in browser UI, then we would have like a consistent. Yeah, it would be in the browser UI. Yeah.
20 minutes till the next session. We can do more Q&A, but if people want to break,
Yeah, go for
got
it.
20 minutes.
Just curious, how about the performance compared to native apps with our PWA at this stage? Like,
So that might get into like feature requesty stuff. But I don't think anybody's complained about performance other than things like background services. And I know that's a thing that Microsoft is interested in, we're interested in, and a lot of people are poking at it.
yeah, I would say that this topic is more about capability than performance. Performance of an installed web app should be the same as the performance of the web app in a tab, and
Yeah.
there's lots of people working all across the web ecosystem to generally improve the performance of web app of websites in browser engines.
Yeah, I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, he doesn't have to.
yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
And
Everybody-